The single father thought the blind date was the strangest favor his boss had ever done for him. He had no idea the woman waiting across the restaurant table had already seen his worst days, knew the name of his daughter, and had spent weeks quietly falling in love with the man he believed nobody would ever choose. Then, just as he was about to meet the woman the CEO had supposedly arranged for him, the restaurant doors opened, and the CEO herself walked in. If you believe in kindness, forgiveness, hope, and second chances, please like this video, leave a meaningful comment, share it with someone who needs hope today, and subscribe to our channel so our community can continue sharing stories that remind us that love can find us when we least expect it. Callum Reeves was the kind of man people noticed only after something went wrong. He was 39, a single father, and the most reliable maintenance technician at Hartwell Tower, a massive corporate building where everything from elevators to heating systems seemed to break at the worst possible moment. Callum never complained. He simply arrived with his worn toolbox, repaired what needed repairing, and went home to the small apartment he shared with his 9-year-old daughter, Maisie. His wife had left them 4 years earlier, not because of a dramatic betrayal or some terrible argument, but because she had decided she wanted a different life. Callum never spoke badly about her. He believed Maisie deserved to remember her mother without bitterness, even if he carried plenty of his own. Money was always tight. Callum carefully counted grocery receipts, repaired his own shoes instead of replacing them, and drove an aging blue sedan that occasionally needed a gentle push before the engine decided to cooperate. But he made sure Maisie never felt poor. He took her to the public library, packed her favorite sandwiches for school, helped her build science projects from recycled cardboard, and attended every school performance he could. He had become both parents in one exhausted body, and although he was often tired, he considered himself lucky. What Callum didn't know was that someone had been watching him for months. Her name was Celeste Arden, the 41-year-old CEO of Hartwell Industries. Celeste was known throughout the company as disciplined, brilliant, and almost impossible to impress. She could walk into a room filled with executives twice her age and make them rethink an entire business strategy before lunch. But Callum had seen another side of her. He had seen her sitting alone in a conference room after a difficult board meeting, quietly wiping tears from her eyes before returning to work. He had seen her visit the children's charity Hartwell supported and kneel beside frightened children without caring about her expensive clothes. He had also seen how quickly she became uncomfortable whenever anyone treated her like a wealthy woman instead of a human being. Their relationship had begun with something painfully ordinary. One rainy morning, the main elevator stopped between floors while Celeste was inside. Callum worked on it for nearly an hour before getting her out safely. He apologized for the inconvenience even though the failure wasn't his fault. Celeste thanked him, but what stayed with her wasn't the repair. It was what happened afterward. Callum noticed she was shaking and quietly offered her his bottle of water. He didn't ask who she was. He didn't flatter her. He didn't seem impressed by her title. He simply saw someone who had been frightened and needed a moment to breathe. A few days later, Celeste discovered why he had been in such a hurry to leave that morning. She saw him outside the building with Maisie, who had come to wait for her father after school. The little girl was holding a drawing of a house with 3 people standing beneath a bright sun. Callum smiled when she showed it to him, even though the third figure was obviously someone who wasn't currently part of their family. Celeste asked Maisie who the third person was. Maisie shrugged and said she didn't know. She had simply drawn the family she hoped they would have someday. The words stayed with Celeste. Over time, she found herself creating innocent reasons to speak with Callum. She asked about maintenance schedules. She requested his opinion on improvements around the building. She occasionally brought extra pastries from a nearby bakery after executive meetings and pretended she had no use for them. Callum always thanked her but never suspected her feelings. Then one afternoon, Celeste overheard him talking to a coworker about dating. The coworker encouraged him to meet someone. Callum laughed and said he barely had enough time to sleep, let alone date. He admitted that he worried women would see his daughter as baggage or judge him for not having money. Celeste felt something break inside her. She knew exactly what it felt like to be judged before being understood. She had been proposed to by men who wanted her company shares, approached by people who wanted access to her wealth, and praised by strangers who didn't know the difference between loving her and admiring her lifestyle. But Callum was different. He had no idea how much money she had, and that was precisely why she trusted him. Still, she was afraid. So she made a plan. Celeste secretly contacted her longtime friend and executive assistant, Marlo Grant, and asked her to find someone kind and trustworthy who might be compatible with Callum. Celeste convinced herself she was doing the right thing. If Callum met someone ordinary, someone who understood his responsibilities and accepted Maisie, perhaps he would finally stop believing that happiness wasn't meant for him. Marlo eventually arranged a blind date with a warm-hearted teacher named Bryony Hale. Celeste planned the entire meeting without telling Callum that she had anything to do with it. When she finally told him about the date, Callum looked stunned. He tried to refuse, but Celeste insisted that he deserved one afternoon where he wasn't simply somebody's father, somebody's employee, or somebody's repairman. She told him that sometimes people needed someone else to remind them that they were allowed to have a life too. Callum reluctantly agreed. The blind date was scheduled for early afternoon at a quiet restaurant near the river. Callum spent the morning feeling ridiculous. He shaved twice, changed shirts 3 times, and finally asked Maisie whether he looked presentable. She studied him with exaggerated seriousness before telling him he looked like someone who had forgotten how to smile. He laughed, hugged her, and promised he would try. At the restaurant, Bryony was supposed to be waiting at a table near the window. But when Callum walked inside, the chair was empty. He checked his phone. Nothing. He waited 10 minutes. Then 20. Finally, he noticed someone standing near the entrance. Celeste. She was wearing a simple blue dress instead of the formal suits she usually wore at work. She looked nervous, almost painfully so. For the first time since Callum had known her, she seemed uncertain about what to say. Callum stared at her in confusion. Celeste walked toward him and admitted the truth. There had never been another woman coming. She had arranged the blind date because she wanted Callum to understand that he deserved companionship. But when the moment came, she couldn't stand the thought of watching another woman sit across from him while she remained somewhere else pretending she didn't care. Callum struggled to process what he was hearing. He asked why she would do something so complicated. Celeste's eyes filled with tears. She told him that she had spent years believing love was dangerous because everyone who approached her seemed to want something. Then she met a man who repaired broken elevators, packed homemade lunches for his daughter, remembered the names of cleaning staff, and stayed late without expecting praise. She realized she didn't want someone impressed by her wealth. She wanted someone who could see her when the title disappeared. Callum looked down. He told her she had misunderstood him. He said he admired her more than she knew, but he was afraid. He was afraid that one day she would wake up and realize she had chosen a life far below what she deserved. He was afraid that Maisie would become attached to her and then lose her. He was afraid of watching the only person he loved walk away. Celeste reached across the table and placed her hand over his. She told him that fear was not proof that love was wrong. Sometimes fear simply meant that something mattered. For the first time, Callum allowed himself to tell her what he had never admitted. He had noticed her long before she noticed him. He remembered the way she smiled when Maisie showed her drawings. He remembered the morning she had stayed in the maintenance room for almost an hour just listening while he talked about his daughter. He remembered how she once defended him when an executive blamed him for a mechanical failure he hadn't caused. He had fallen in love with her too. But before they could take another step, an unexpected problem arrived. Callum received a phone call from his daughter's school. Maisie had become upset after another child told her that her father was pretending to be important around rich people. The words had embarrassed her. Callum immediately stood to leave. Celeste didn't hesitate. She went with him. At the school, Callum found Maisie sitting in the office with tears running down her cheeks. He knelt beside her and reassured her that nobody else's opinion could define their family. Celeste sat beside them, not as a CEO, but as someone who genuinely cared. Maisie looked at her and asked whether she was the woman her father was supposed to meet. Celeste smiled through her tears and admitted that she was the woman who had arranged the date. Maisie thought for a moment and then asked whether Celeste liked her father. Celeste looked at Callum. She didn't answer immediately. Then she told Maisie that her father was one of the kindest men she had ever met. Maisie smiled. She told Celeste that was good because her father needed someone who would make him laugh more. Callum laughed so hard that the tension finally broke. But the biggest challenge was still ahead. When Celeste's board members discovered that she was romantically involved with a company employee, they questioned her judgment. One investor warned her that the relationship could become a public relations problem. Another suggested Callum might be using her. Some even advised her to end the relationship before it affected the company. Celeste listened quietly. Then she did something unexpected. She refused to hide. She told the board that her personal life was not a weakness and that Callum's job did not determine his character. She made it clear that she would never use her position to give him special treatment, and she would never allow anyone to humiliate him because he earned his living with his hands. Callum, however, felt guilty. He considered leaving the company entirely. When Celeste discovered this, she became heartbroken. She told him that she didn't need him to quit his life to prove that he loved her. She wanted him to build a life beside hers, not disappear into it. Callum finally understood. For years, he had confused sacrifice with love. He believed that loving someone meant giving up whatever might make them uncomfortable. But Celeste taught him that healthy love could also mean standing together when the world questioned them. Months later, Callum received an opportunity to become the facilities director for one of Hartwell's major properties. He initially refused because he thought Celeste had arranged it. She assured him that the position had been offered because of his work record, not because of their relationship. She even removed herself from the hiring decision to make sure everything remained fair. Callum accepted. It was the first time in years that he had allowed himself to dream beyond survival. Maisie eventually became close to Celeste too. They spent weekends together during the day, visited museums, baked cookies, and worked on school projects. Celeste never tried to replace Maisie's mother. She simply became another person who loved her. One bright afternoon, nearly a year after the strange blind date, Callum brought Celeste back to the same restaurant where everything had changed. He had arranged the table by the window. Celeste smiled when she realized where they were. Callum admitted that he had spent years thinking he needed to become richer, more successful, and more impressive before he could deserve someone like her. Then he told her something he wished he had understood sooner. The woman who had arranged a blind date for him had unknowingly given him something far more valuable than a romantic introduction. She had given him permission to believe that he was still worthy of happiness. Celeste reached for his hand. She told him that she had once believed she needed someone powerful enough to stand beside her. Now she knew she needed someone kind enough to stand beside her when power didn't matter. Callum looked toward the restaurant window where sunlight spilled across the table. Then he smiled and told her that the funniest part was that she had tried to find him someone else. Celeste laughed through tears and said she had made a terrible mistake. Callum squeezed her hand and told her it was the best mistake she had ever made. Just before the ending, we want to hear from you. Leave a meaningful comment and tell us what you believe the real lesson of this story is. Should love be about finding someone who fits into your world, or finding someone who makes you feel at home in theirs? If this story touched your heart, please like this video, leave a meaningful comment, share it with someone who needs hope today, and subscribe to our channel so you never miss another emotional journey. And as the afternoon sunlight filled the restaurant, Callum watched Maisie laughing with Celeste at the table beside him and realized something he had forgotten long ago: sometimes life doesn't give you the person you were looking for. Sometimes it gives you the person who teaches you that you were never too broken, too poor, too busy, or too ordinary to be loved. The blind date had started as a favor. It became a confession. And somehow, the CEO who had arranged a woman for a lonely single father ended up discovering that the person she had been searching for all along was sitting right in front of her.